Hi, my name is Patrick Reagan. The Computer Primary Component Series will go in depth of the individual components that make up the computer. This video, BIOS Setup Program, covers how to use the BIOS Setup Program to configure motherboard options, peripherals, boot options, and security settings. It also discusses setting a power on password and administrative password, and enabling TPM, SecureBoot, hyperthread control, and virtualization options. The BIOS Setup Program is a program that you can configure the hardware of the system, including which drive to boot from or to boot from the network. The BIOS Setup Program is stored in the system ROM chip, which is part of the chipset. Each computer will be different, but to open up the BIOS Setup Program, you'll most likely need to press the Del, F1, F2, or F10 key during a cold boot before the OS gets loaded. You should press the specific key every 2 seconds during the boot. I would not press it too many times quickly, and I would not hold down the key. This will generate an error. To find out for sure which key to press, download the system guide or manual for the motherboard or the computer to find out which key to press. Alternatively, for Windows 10 and 11, you can click the Settings gear button, click Update and Security, click Recovery, and click Restart Now. Then click Troubleshoot, click Advanced Options, click UEFI Firmware Settings or Startup Settings, and click Restart Now to automatically go into the BIOS Setup Program. For the HP computer, I press the F10 key to enter the BIOS Setup Program. Then I can press the F9 key to pick which drive to boot from, or I can press F10 to enter the BIOS Setup Program. This slide shows the boot devices I can boot from. I can boot Windows from the Windows Boot Manager on the Intel drive inside the computer, or I can select the Samsung flash drive, which I have plugged into a USB port. If I pressed F10 to get into the BIOS Setup Program, this is what the main screen shows. Most of it is informational, such as the product name of the server, the processor and speed, total memory, and BIOS version. The only information that I can update on the screen is the date and time, which may need to be updated if I cannot log in because of an invalid date and time. However, many operating systems automatically update the date and time for the system when they are communicating over the internet. From the configuration page, you can enable or disable virtualization and hyperthreading. You can also specify the default state of the numlock key when you first turn on the computer. You can also go into the device options, which will allow you to enable or disable integrated video. If you have a video expansion card, you should disable this option. The thermal option shows the CPU fan speed and system fan speed. The boot options allow me to specify the boot order the system looks for to boot from. While most of the systems will boot directly to the C drive, you may need to modify this if you want to boot from the USB drive or DVD disk. Of course, you can always use the F9 key to boot from a specific device if you need to. The security setting specifies the power on password, which is used immediately when you turn on the computer, before the operating system loads. You can also set up the administrative password, which can be used to require a password to access the BIOS Setup Program. If I dig deeper into this page, I see device security, USB security, and slot security, which gives me the opportunity to disable built-in devices, drives, USB ports, and expansion slots. You may also use this example where you want to prevent someone from plugging in a USB drive to the system and copying sensitive data to the drive, or installing malware on the system. It's more secure if you boot from the hard drive and you have SecureBoot enabled. In addition, use administrative password to prevent changes in the BIOS Setup Program. In the UEFI versus legacy boot mode determines how the system boots the operating system. UEFI is the modern firmware standard that replaced traditional BIOS. UEFI boot mode supports SecureBoot, GPT partitioning, which allows drives greater than 2 terabytes and faster boot times. Legacy boot mode emulates the old school BIOS that supports MBR partitioning, which is limited to 2 terabyte disk and is needed for booting older operating systems like Windows 7 or DOS tools or legacy bootloaders. If you don't know the BIOS password, you can clear the password by using one of the following methods. Check your system or motherboard guide, looking for jumpers or a small push button that will clear the password, or remove the CMOS battery. Most motherboards have a CMOS reset jumper, often labeled CRL_CMOS or JBAT1 to reset BIOS to defaults. A Trusted Platform Module, or TPM, is a specialized chip on a laptop or desktop computer motherboard or in its processor that is designed to secure hardware and integrated cryptographic keys. Today, it is usually part of the chipset. TPM uses cryptography to help securely store essential and critical information on PCs to enable platform authentication. They store a variety of sensitive information, including user credentials, passwords, fingerprints, certificates, and encryption keys. It is enabled or disabled in the BIOS setup program. This slide shows that you can enable or disable the TPM on the motherboard. SecureBoot is a UEFI firmware function that helps prevent malware from hijacking the system during the boot process by preventing an unauthorized operating system and UEFI drivers that does not have an acceptable digital signature from loading. Digital signatures are used to verify the software came from a reputable source and that it has not been altered since it was signed. SecureBoot is supported by recent versions of Windows and most Linux systems, and is required for Windows 11. However, it may prevent other operating systems from loading. To enable or disable SecureBoot is done in the BIOS setup program. When you make changes in the BIOS setup program, you need to save the changes as you exit. This is done under Exit menu, where you select Save Changes and Exit. You also have the option to discard changes and exit by selecting the Ignore and Exit option. If you're having some problems with the system, you can try to load setup defaults to see if a specific setting is causing problems. This will reload the BIOS setup settings back to the default settings. The rest of the presentation shows a Dell laptop computer with the graphical BIOS setup program. The graphical interface works with the mouse. Since it's a laptop, it has battery information and additional power settings as well as Thunderbolt options. Under System Configuration, you can disable drives as shown on the screen, as well as the many other built-in components. Under Security, you can see the admin and system passwords and the TPM settings. This screen allows you to enable or disable SecureBoot. This slide shows the second screen for SecureBoot running in deployed mode or audit mode. Audit mode allows you to test UEFI drivers in bootloader without actually blocking them. This slide shows the enable or disable options for hyperthreading, as well as the virtualization technology options. This is from an older Lenovo ThinkPad, which allows you to configure Intel SpeedStep, which is used to dynamic adjust processor voltage and core frequency based on how it is being used at the time, so that it can decrease power consumption, decrease heat production, and support a longer battery life. Motherboards often include an integrated fan controller and temperature sensor. Most of today's BIOS will allow you to view CPU chassis temperature, fan speed, and fan voltage. Many systems will have Smart Fan or Q fan control, which will change fan speed adjustments based on temperature, and some systems will have a silent mode or quiet mode that minimizes fan noise. Of course, the system may run hotter with silent or quiet mode. Question: what is the best way to disable USB ports or motherboard peripherals? Answer: disable it using the BIOS setup program. Question: you have an Intel processor with 8 cores. However, when you use Task Manager in Windows, it only shows as 8 logical cores. What should you do? Answer: enable hyper-threading using the BIOS setup program. Question: you turn on a new machine and it prompts you for a password immediately without loading the operating system. What should you do if you don't know what the password is? Answer: remove the CMOS battery and reinsert it after 10 seconds. Question: what is the most secure way to disable all USB ports on a system so that they cannot be used on a computer? Choose two answers. Answer: disable the USB ports in the BIOS setup program and configure a password for the BIOS setup program. Question: a computer's BIOS interface can be accessed by pressing what? Answer: the key set by the motherboard manufacturer for accessing BIOS configuration interface during boot. Question: after completing the initial diagnostic procedure and allocating system resources, the startup BIOS program checks for information about secondary storage devices that might contain the OS. The list of the devices in the order in which they should be checked can be found and arranged in BIOS. This functionality can be accessed via what? Answer: boot options. Question: which BIOS configuration option allows to mitigate the risk of malware infection? Answer: USB configuration settings. The BIOS configuration interface provides a wide range of advanced hardware related options. In modern PCs, depending on the specific BIOS type and version, these options might typically include what? Answer: all of the above. Question: a UEFI functionality designed to prevent the loading of malware in unauthorized OS is called what? Answer: SecureBoot. Question: which of the following could be of help in troubleshooting a system that attempts to boot to incorrect device? Choose two answers. Answer: disconnecting any removable external drives such as USB thumb drives, and checking BIOS settings for boot order. For more information, visit these sites. In summary, the BIOS setup program is a program that you can configure the hardware of your system, including which drive to boot from or to boot from the network. The BIOS setup program is stored in the system ROM chip. Boot options or boot menu will allow you to change which drive to boot from. You can enable or disable virtualization technology or hyper-threading using the BIOS setup program. You can enable or disable motherboard or system hardware devices including drives, ports such as USB, slots, and peripherals such as camera and microphones. To make your system more secure, you can specify a power-on password when turning on the computer, an administrator password used to access the BIOS setup program using the BIOS setup program. A Trusted Platform Module, or TPM, is a specialized chip on the laptop or desktop computer motherboard or in its processor that is designed to secure hardware and integrated cryptographic keys. It is enabled or disabled in the BIOS setup program. SecureBoot prevents an unauthorized operating system and UEFI drivers that does not have an acceptable digital signature from loading. SecureBoot is enabled or disabled in the BIOS setup program. Thank you for watching this video. The next video will be Computer Primary Components, Part 6, RAM. If you have not already, subscribe to the Pat Has Your Back channel. Thank you.